The desert wind carries whispers of eternity, as if the sand itself remembers the footsteps of kings, queens, and workers who once walked along the Nile. Every grain holds the weight of time, and every stone once laid in those monumental pyramids carries a story that still haunts the imagination. Ancient Egypt is more than ruins and relics. It is the story of humanity's reach toward immortality, a civilization that rose from the fertile banks of the Nile and endured for thousands of years, shaping the foundations of culture, religion, and governance across the world. It is a saga of ambition, innovation, glory, and eventual decline. To understand Egypt is to understand the rhythm of life and death, the cycle of rise and fall that defines all human civilizations. Hello and welcome to the Other Side Stories. Here, we travel beyond the usual headlines to explore the untold tales of world history, mysteries, turning points, and hidden connections that shaped our planet. If you love discovering how the past still echoes in our present, you're in the right place. Let's uncover the other side of history together. The Nile was Egypt's beating heart. Each year, its waters would flood the surrounding plains, depositing rich black soil upon which life could thrive. Without the Nile, there would be no Egypt. The river gave them food, trade, transportation, and above all, the confidence to believe they were chosen by the gods. The earliest settlers learned to read its cycles, to plant when the waters receded, to harvest under the sun's relentless gaze, and to store grain against the uncertainty of seasons. From this relationship between river and people, the first seeds of Egyptian civilization sprouted. In the beginning, Egypt was not united. Small communities clustered along the riverbanks, forming villages and local chieftaincies. Over time, these coalesced into two major regions, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north, where the Nile spreads into a wide delta before reaching the Mediterranean Sea. These lands were different in climate, in culture, and in power, and they clashed repeatedly for dominance. Yet from their struggle emerged the idea of kingship, the belief that one divine ruler could bring order to chaos. Tradition tells us that around 3100 BCE, King Narmer, or Minos as some sources call him, united the two lands, wearing the double crown that symbolized authority over both Upper and Lower Egypt. This moment, the unification of Egypt, was the birth of one of the longest-lasting civilizations the world has ever seen. For over 3,000 years, Egypt would endure, a beacon of stability in a turbulent ancient world. Dynasties rose and fell, temples and tombs were built and plundered, and through it all, the Egyptians held to their faith in the afterlife, their reverence for the gods, and their loyalty to the pharaoh. The pharaoh was not simply a king, he was a god on earth. To the people, he embodied Horus, the falcon god, and upon death, he would merge with Osiris, ruler of the underworld. This divine kingship gave Egypt unity and purpose. When the pharaoh commanded a pyramid, thousands labored not only out of obedience, but out of religious devotion, believing that in serving the king, they served the gods themselves. This is why the pyramids still stand, not as symbols of tyranny, but as testaments to a society that believed deeply in the eternal. The Old Kingdom, often called the Age of the Pyramids, saw the construction of Egypt's most iconic monuments. At Giza, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, the Pyramid of Khafre, and the Pyramid of Menkaure rose like mountains of stone against the desert sky. These were not mere tombs. They were statements of divine authority, designed to ensure the king's passage into the afterlife and to anchor his memory for eternity. Alongside them, the enigmatic Sphinx, with its lion's body and human face, watched silently, perhaps guarding the pharaohs, or perhaps embodying mysteries we still cannot solve. But building pyramids required enormous resources: stone quarries, skilled laborers, food supplies, and logistical genius. The Pyramid Age was made possible by Egypt's strong centralized government and the abundance provided by the Nile. For centuries, the system worked, but eventually cracks appeared. The cost of monument building strained the economy. Local governors, called nomarchs, grew more powerful and independent, challenging the pharaoh's control. The Nile itself betrayed them when floods failed, leading to famine and suffering. Around 2200 BCE, Egypt entered its first great crisis, the First Intermediate Period. This was a time of division and chaos. Central authority collapsed, rival dynasties claimed the throne, and civil war erupted. Tombs from this period are filled not with the grandeur of the pyramids, but with laments about hunger, fear, and disorder. One ancient text declares, describing a society in upheaval. Yet from this turmoil arose resilience. Local rulers took on greater responsibility, and the Egyptian spirit adapted. Eventually, unity returned under the Middle Kingdom around 2050 BCE, when a new line of kings from Thebes restored order. The Middle Kingdom was a period of renaissance, marked by literature, art, and architecture. The pharaohs, though still divine, presented themselves as shepherds of the people, protectors who cared for their subjects' well-being. Great irrigation projects expanded agriculture, and trade flourished with Nubia to the south, Byblos to the north, and even distant lands. This era gave rise to some of Egypt's most enduring literature, such as the Tale of Sinahu, reflecting on loyalty, exile, and homecoming. Yet history repeats itself. Over time, the Middle Kingdom too weakened. Foreign invaders, known as the Hyksos, likely from the Levant, introduced new technologies, horse-drawn chariots, composite bows, and bronze weapons that gave them an edge over the Egyptians. Around 1650 BCE, the Hyksos seized control of Lower Egypt, ruling from their capital at Avaris, while native Egyptian kings held on to Thebes in the south. This second intermediate period was another time of fragmentation, but it planted the seeds of Egypt's greatest age. The struggle against the Hyksos forged a new Egyptian identity. Determined to reclaim their land, the pharaohs of Thebes waged war, eventually driving the Hyksos out and reunifying the country around 1550 BCE. This victory launched the New Kingdom, Egypt's golden age. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom were warriors, conquerors, and empire builders. They extended Egypt's reach into the Levant, Nubia, and beyond, amassing wealth, tribute, and prestige. It was in this period that some of Egypt's most famous rulers emerged. Hatshepsut, a female pharaoh, ruled as king in all but name, donning the false beard and presenting herself as the embodiment of divine authority. She commissioned magnificent temples, most notably her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, and opened trade routes to Punt, bringing back exotic goods like incense, ivory, and gold. After her reign, Thutmose III expanded Egypt's empire through military campaigns, earning the title Napoleon of Egypt. Then came Amenhotep IV, better known as Akhenaten, who shocked the nation by introducing a new religion. He abandoned the traditional gods, elevating the Aten, the sun disk, as the sole deity, and even changed his own name to reflect his devotion. He built a new capital, Akhetaten, modern Amarna, and his reign is remembered as a time of radical change, known today as the Amarna Revolution. Yet his vision of monotheism collapsed soon after his death. His successor, the boy king, Tutankhamun, restored the old gods, but his fame today comes not from his reign, but from the discovery of his nearly intact tomb in 1922, which sparked global fascination with Egyptology. The New Kingdom reached its peak under Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great. He reigned for 66 years, building colossal temples, statues, and monuments. His victory, or perhaps propaganda, at the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites became legendary, and he signed one of the world's first known peace treaties. His building projects, from Abu Simbel in the south to the Great Halls of Karnak, still awe visitors today. Yet even under Ramses, cracks were forming. By the late New Kingdom, corruption spread, priests of Amun grew as powerful as the pharaohs themselves, and foreign threats mounted. Invasions by the mysterious sea peoples destabilized the region. Internal unrest, economic troubles, and weak rulers accelerated decline. By 1070 BCE, Egypt entered its third intermediate period, a time of fragmentation, foreign domination, and slow erosion of its once mighty power. But Egypt's story did not end. For centuries, it was ruled by Libyan chieftains, Nubian kings, Assyrian conquerors, and Persian emperors. Each left their mark, but Egypt retained its identity, its temples, its gods. Finally, in 332 BCE, Alexander the Great swept into Egypt, greeted not as a conqueror, but as a liberator from Persian rule. He founded Alexandria, a city that would become a center of knowledge, culture, and commerce. After his death, his general Ptolemy controlled, establishing the Ptolemaic dynasty that fused Greek and Egyptian traditions. And so, the last great chapter of ancient Egypt unfolded, culminating with Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh. Her reign was one of political intrigue, alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and eventual defeat at the hands of Rome. With her death in 30 BCE, Egypt became a Roman province, and the age of the pharaohs came to an end. Yet even in decline, Egypt's influence endured. Roman emperors adopted Egyptian symbols, priests continued ancient rituals, and travelers marveled at the pyramids and temples. Later, as Christianity and Islam spread, Egypt's old gods faded, but the fascination with its monuments only grew. From Napoleon's scholars in the 18th century to modern archaeologists, the quest to understand Egypt has never ceased. Ancient Egypt's rise and fall is not just
the river, the gods, and the kings. These three forces shaped every heartbeat of ancient Egypt. To truly grasp how this civilization rose to such heights and endured for millennia, we must look closer, beneath the grand monuments and royal names, into the daily lives of those who lived, worked, prayed, and dreamed along the Nile. The greatness of Egypt was not built only by pharaohs and priests, but also by countless farmers, artisans, soldiers, and scribes whose devotion to the order of their world sustained its very core. The Egyptian worldview was centered on a concept known as ma'at. This word carried many meanings: truth, balance, justice, and harmony. It was both a moral principle and a cosmic order, believed to have been established at creation by the gods themselves. To live in accordance with Ma'at was to live rightly, to maintain balance between chaos and order, between humanity and the divine. The pharaoh was seen as the ultimate guarantor of Ma'at, responsible not only for ruling justly, but for ensuring that the Nile flooded, the sun rose, and the universe remained in harmony. Without Ma'at, the Egyptians believed their world would collapse into darkness. This belief explains why the Egyptians built so much, prayed so fervently, and recorded their rituals with meticulous care. Temples were not simply places of worship, they were engines of cosmic stability. Priests performed daily rites to awaken statues of gods, offer food, burn incense, and recite prayers, ensuring that the gods were honored and Ma'at preserved. The walls of these temples, inscribed with hieroglyphs and scenes of devotion, were more than decoration. They were eternal affirmations of harmony. Hieroglyphs themselves are a marvel of Egyptian culture. This system of writing, blending pictorial beauty with linguistic precision, appeared as early as 3100 BCE and endured for over 3,000 years. To the Egyptians, writing was not just communication, it was magic. Words had power, and to inscribe a name or a spell was to make it real. Scribes, therefore, held immense importance. Trained in years of rigorous study, they were the keepers of knowledge, recording everything from royal decrees to grain harvests, religious hymns to medical recipes. Without scribes, Egypt's memory would not have survived, and without their texts, we would know far less of its grandeur today. Life for the average Egyptian, however, was far removed from the luxury of the royal court. Most were farmers, dependent on the Nile's floodwaters. When the river rose, they planted wheat, barley, and flax. When it receded, they harvested, storing surplus grain in communal granaries. Their homes were made of mud brick, their tools simple but effective. Yet even in these modest settings, religion permeated daily existence. Household shrines honored protective deities, amulets warded off misfortune, and the cycle of festivals tied their lives to the rhythms of gods and seasons alike. Artisans, meanwhile, carved and painted the wonders we marvel at today. In the tombs of nobles, walls burst with vibrant scenes of feasts, hunting, and music, meant to accompany the dead into eternity. Craftsmen created jewelry of gold and lapis lazuli, statues of serene beauty, and coffins adorned with protective spells. Their work was not merely aesthetic, it was functional, imbued with magic to safeguard the soul. And then there were the workers who built the great pyramids and temples. For centuries, it was believed they were slaves, driven by whips under the scorching sun. But excavations at Giza have revealed something far more complex. Evidence suggests that these builders were well-organized teams of skilled laborers, supported by vast kitchens, bakeries, and medical facilities. They worked in rotating shifts, housed in barracks, and fed with meat, bread, and beer. Though the labor was grueling, it was also an act of devotion, a national project that united the people in service to their pharaoh and their gods. Religion shaped not only life but death. The Egyptians believed in an afterlife, a continuation of existence in a perfected form. But reaching this eternal paradise was not guaranteed. It required preparation, rituals, and moral purity. The body had to be preserved, leading to the practice of mummification. By carefully drying and wrapping the body, embalmers sought to protect it for eternity, ensuring that the soul could return. The soul itself was a complex concept. Egyptians spoke of multiple spiritual components: the Ka, a person's life force; the Ba, their individuality, often depicted as a bird with a human head; and the Ak, the transfigured spirit that lived among the gods. To secure these, tombs were stocked with food, clothing, furniture, and even servants, real or in the form of small figurines called ushapti. Tomb walls bore spells and prayers, many drawn from what we now call the Book of the Dead, guiding the deceased through the perilous journey of the underworld. At the heart of this journey was the judgment of the dead. In a grand cosmic courtroom, the soul stood before Osiris, lord of the underworld. The heart, believed to be the seat of thought and morality, was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If it balanced, the soul passed into paradise, the field of reeds, where eternal joy awaited. If it was heavier, burdened by sin, it was devoured by a monstrous creature named Amit, and the soul was destroyed. This belief gave every Egyptian a moral compass, a reason to live justly, not just for the pharaoh, but for their own eternal fate. The grandeur of Egypt, however, was always fragile, dependent on stability at home and strength abroad. During the New Kingdom, military expansion brought Egypt immense wealth. Gold flowed in from Nubia, tribute arrived from conquered lands, and trade stretched from the Aegean to Mesopotamia. Foreign luxuries, cedar wood from Lebanon, silver from Anatolia, exotic animals from Africa, filled Egyptian palaces. The empire was rich, confident, and feared. Yet expansion also sowed seeds of vulnerability. Maintaining garrisons abroad strained resources. Tribute depended on loyalty, and loyalty was fickle. Enemies adapted, learning Egyptian tactics and matching their power. Meanwhile, at home, the growing influence of the priesthood of Amun challenged royal authority. Temples at Karnak and Luxor grew into sprawling complexes, consuming wealth and manpower. Priests controlled vast estates, rivaling the pharaoh himself. The balance of Ma'at was tipping. One of the most dramatic symbols of this tension was the reign of Akhenaten. By abandoning the old gods and elevating the Aten, he sought to break the power of the priesthood of Amun. Yet in doing so, he destabilized centuries of tradition. The art of his time, with its elongated figures and intimate family scenes, was revolutionary, breaking with the rigid conventions of earlier styles. But his revolution was fragile. After his death, his city was abandoned, his memory erased, and the old gods restored. It was as if Egypt itself rejected such a radical departure from its traditions. As the New Kingdom waned, Egypt faced external pressures it could not ignore. The Sea Peoples, a confederation of mysterious raiders, swept through the Mediterranean around 1200 BCE, toppling empires and destabilizing trade. Egypt repelled some of their attacks under Ramses III, but at great cost. The economy faltered, corruption spread, and unrest grew among the common people. Labor strikes, recorded at Deir el-Medina, show workers demanding their rations, a striking image of discontent in a society famed for stability. By the end of the New Kingdom, Egypt was no longer the invincible empire it once had been. Divided between rival dynasties, weakened by foreign invasions, and drained of resources, it slipped into the Third Intermediate Period. Here, foreign rulers, Libyans, Nubians, and later Assyrians, took their turn on Egypt's throne. Each left traces of influence, blending cultures in ways both enriching and disruptive. Despite decline, Egypt retained its allure. When the Nubian kings of Kush conquered Egypt in the 8th century BCE, they embraced its traditions, building pyramids in Nubia and ruling as true pharaohs. When the Assyrians invaded, they admired and plundered Egypt's wealth, leaving behind chaos but also testifying to Egypt's enduring prestige. Persian rule in the 6th century BCE brought Egypt into the vast Achaemenid Empire, a system of satraps and governors. Though Persian kings like Darius I respected Egyptian customs, resentment simmered and revolts erupted. Egypt longed for independence, and it briefly regained it under native rulers, but these flickers of autonomy were short-lived. The arrival of Alexander the Great in 332 BCE marked a turning point. Unlike other conquerors, he presented himself as a son of the gods, visiting the oracle of Amun at Siwa, where he was declared divine. Egyptians, weary of Persian rule, welcomed him as a liberator. Alexandria, the city he founded, became a beacon of culture, home to the legendary Library of Alexandria and the towering Pharaohs lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Under the Ptolemies, Egypt was both Greek and Egyptian. The rulers adopted the title of pharaoh, built temples in the old style, and honored Egyptian gods. Yet, they also brought Greek language, art, and philosophy. This fusion created a unique society where Greek elites mingled with Egyptian traditions, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in tension. Cleopatra VII, the last of the Ptolemies, embodied this duality. She was Macedonian by blood, but she spoke Egyptian, worshipped the old gods, and presented herself as Isis incarnate. Her intelligence, charisma, and political skill made her a formidable figure in a world dominated by Rome. Her alliances with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony were not mere romance. To understand the rise and fall of ancient Egypt in full, we must dive deeper into its inner workings, the systems of power, the flow of resources, the evolution of art and science, and the resilience of a people who adapted time and again to shifting circumstances. This is not only a tale of kings and battles, but of ideas, creativity, and innovation that outlived even the collapse of dynasties. At the center of Egyptian life was the Nile, but it was the administration around it that turned river water into prosperity. Every year, officials measured the height of the flood with a device called a nilometer. Too low a flood meant famine, too high meant destruction. The government maintained records, calculated taxes, and distributed resources, making Egypt one of the most efficiently managed states of the ancient world. The granaries of Egypt became legendary, capable of feeding its population and providing surplus for trade. This bureaucracy, scribes, overseers, tax collectors, was the machinery behind the majesty. Without it, pyramids could not have risen, temples could not have been adorned, and armies could not have marched. Egyptian society was hierarchical, but flexible enough to allow mobility through talent, loyalty, or fortune. At the top stood the pharaoh, then the royal family and nobles. Below them were priests, scribes, and officials, followed by craftsmen, farmers, and laborers. At the bottom were slaves, often prisoners of war. Yet even at the lowest levels, there was dignity in service to the pharaoh and gods. Workers' villages like Deir el-Medina show evidence of community life, wages, and even organized strikes when conditions failed. This reveals a society both disciplined and surprisingly human, where the voices of ordinary people sometimes reached the record of history. Science and technology advanced in tandem with religious devotion. The alignment of temples with solstices, the precision of pyramid construction, and the use of geometry and land measurement all reflect a profound understanding of mathematics and astronomy. The Egyptians developed a solar calendar of 365 days, remarkably close to our own, and divided the day into 24 hours. Their medical texts, such as the Edwin Smith Papyrus, describe surgical techniques, wound treatments, and diagnoses. While infused with magic and incantations, these practices also show empirical observation and experimentation. Art, too, carried both religious and cultural weight. Egyptian art is instantly recognizable for its distinctive style. Figures drawn in profile with frontal eyes, proportions based on strict canons, and scenes arranged in registers. This was not lack of creativity, it was deliberate, a visual language meant to ensure clarity and permanence. The goal was not realism, but eternity. By representing the world in an idealized form, Egyptians believed they were preserving it against the decay of time. Monumental architecture embodied this eternal vision. The pyramids were only the beginning. Over centuries, architecture evolved into vast temple complexes. At Karnak, the hypostyle hall, with its forest of colossal columns, feels like walking into a stone-made universe, where light and shadow play across carved hieroglyphics. At Abu Simbel, statues of Ramses II tower against the desert cliff, aligned so that twice a year, the sun's rays illuminate the inner sanctuary. These achievements were not only feats of engineering, but also messages to the gods and to posterity. Egypt was eternal. Yet eternity is an illusion. The very monuments that proclaimed permanence were vulnerable to weather, to time, to human greed. Tombs were plundered, statues defaced, and temples dismantled. Even the pyramids, mighty as they are, were stripped of their gleaming white limestone casing stones, leaving the rough core we see today. Still, enough remains to remind us of Egypt's ambition, its longing for immortality. The cycles of strength and weakness that marked Egypt's history can also be seen in its interactions with neighbors. To the south lay Nubia, rich in gold, ivory, and soldiers. Sometimes Nubia was a trade partner, sometimes a colony, sometimes a conqueror. To the northeast lay Canaan and the Levant, crossroads of trade and battleground of empires. Egypt's armies marched there to secure tribute and buffer zones, but their hold was always contested. Farther afield, relations with Mesopotamia brought cultural exchange, diplomacy, and occasional rivalry. What stands out is Egypt's remarkable continuity. While Mesopotamia saw empires rise and fall in rapid succession, Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Egypt maintained cultural stability for centuries. Its language, religion, and political ideology changed slowly, resisting external pressures. This endurance created the impression, even to outsiders, of a timeless land, unchanging and eternal. Greek travelers like Herodotus described Egypt as ancient even in their day, a civilization so old that it seemed almost outside of time. But beneath the surface, Egypt was always evolving. The shift from pyramid building to hidden tombs in the Valley of the Kings reflects both economic pressures and changing beliefs. Constructing colossal pyramids had become unsustainable and too tempting for robbers. Instead, New Kingdom pharaohs sought secrecy, carving tombs deep into the cliffs near Thebes. These tombs were decorated with intricate scenes of the afterlife, spells, and journeys through the underworld, showing a theology that grew ever more complex. One of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian religion was its adaptability. Gods merged and transformed, absorbing new attributes. Amun, once a local god of Thebes, rose to supreme prominence, merging with Ra to become Amun-Ra, king of the gods. Osiris evolved from a fertility god into the ruler of the dead. Isis, protector of magic and motherhood, spread far beyond Egypt, eventually becoming one of the most beloved deities of the Greco-Roman world. This fluidity allowed the religion to remain relevant across centuries, even as political power shifted. The fall of Egypt was not sudden. It was a long unraveling stretched across centuries as internal weaknesses met external challenges. During the late period, foreign domination became the norm. Libyan dynasties took the throne, followed by Nubian rulers, then Assyrian conquerors who burned cities and carried away treasures. The Persians incorporated Egypt into their empire, imposing governors but also respecting traditions. Each wave left scars, but also threads woven into Egypt's tapestry. When Alexander arrived, he encountered not a broken land, but a land weary of foreign rule, yet proud of its heritage. The Macedonian conqueror embraced Egyptian traditions, seeking legitimacy as a pharaoh. His successors, the Ptolemies, mastered this dual identity. They built Greek-style cities, but also restored temples in Egyptian style. They minted coins with their portraits, but in temple reliefs, they appeared as traditional pharaohs, offering to the gods. This balancing act created a hybrid culture unique to Egypt. Cleopatra VII, the most famous of the Ptolemies, embodied this blend. Fluent in Egyptian and several other languages, she was more than the seductress of legend. She was a skilled diplomat, administrator, and strategist, trying to preserve Egypt's independence in the face of Rome's expansion. Her partnerships with Caesar and Antony were pragmatic, though they became the stuff of legend. Her defeat marked not only the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, but the final chapter of pharaonic rule. Roman Egypt remained vital, supplying grain to feed Rome's population. Temples continued to function, and traditional art persisted alongside Roman styles. Over time, however, new religions shifted the landscape. Christianity spread, often in tension with traditional cults. Temples were closed, hieroglyphs forgotten, and the old gods silenced. By the time the last hieroglyph was carved in the 4th century CE, the language of the pharaohs was already a mystery, waiting millennia to be rediscovered. The rediscovery came in 1799 with the Rosetta Stone. Carved with the same text in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs, it provided the key to unlocking Egypt's lost language. When Jean-François Champollion deciphered hieroglyphs in 1822, the voices of ancient Egypt spoke again, revealing a civilization both familiar and strange, bound by human concerns but reaching for the divine. Today, as we gaze upon Egypt's ruins, we see more than stones. We see echoes of ambition, faith, resilience, and fragility. Egypt rose on the promise of eternity, yet it too succumbed to time. Its fall reminds us that no empire is immortal, yet its legacy endures, shaping art, religion, and imagination across the world. And perhaps that is Egypt's greatest triumph, not eternal rule, but eternal memory.
The grandeur of ancient Egypt was not only expressed in stone, but also in ideas, concepts of law, morality, time, and the soul that reached beyond its borders and survived long after its decline. Egypt's story is a paradox. It sought permanence, yet it thrived on adaptation. It clung to tradition, yet it absorbed new influences. This tension between stability and change is what made it endure so long, and what also set the stage for its eventual unraveling. One of Egypt's greatest legacies lies in its approach to law and governance. The principle of Ma'at was not just a spiritual ideal, but also a legal foundation. Pharaohs and officials were expected to rule according to truth and justice, ensuring fairness in disputes and protection for the vulnerable. Legal texts show concern for property rights, inheritance, marriage contracts, and workers' wages. While the pharaoh's word was supreme, a sense of balance guided decisions. This gave Egyptians a remarkable sense of order in comparison to many of their contemporaries, whose systems were more arbitrary. Economically, Egypt's prosperity depended on the Nile's rhythms, but it also relied on innovation. The use of irrigation channels, Shadoof water lifting devices, and large-scale storage made farming more reliable. Agriculture supported not only Egypt itself, but also trade networks that extended into Africa, the Levant, and the Mediterranean. Gold from Nubia, incense from Punt, cedar from Lebanon, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan all passed through Egypt's markets. This interconnectedness gave Egypt wealth, but also made it vulnerable when trade routes collapsed during wider regional crises. The role of women in Egypt is another fascinating dimension. Unlike in many ancient societies, Egyptian women enjoyed relatively high status. They could own property, engage in business, and initiate divorce. Some rose to positions of remarkable power. Hatshepsut ruled as pharaoh, presenting herself in male regalia but asserting authority with confidence. Queens like Nefertiti wielded influence in religious revolutions, and Cleopatra VII demonstrated unmatched political acumen, holding her throne in an age when Rome consumed everything around it. The visibility of powerful women in Egypt speaks to a culture that valued balance between male and female principles, often symbolized in its gods and goddesses. Religion remained the glue that bound society together. The pantheon of gods was vast: Ra, Amun, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Hathor, Anubis, Thoth, and many others, each with roles, myths, and cult centers.
Myths explained creation, the journey of the sun, the struggle between order and chaos. The Osiris myth, in which the god is murdered by his brother Set and resurrected by Isis, became a central narrative about death, rebirth, and the promise of immortality. This mythic structure reinforced the hope of an afterlife for every Egyptian, not just for kings. Temples were microcosms of the universe. The outer walls represented the chaotic desert, the courtyards symbolized the ordered world, and the inner sanctuaries housed the divine presence. Rituals performed within were not for public congregation, but for maintaining cosmic balance. Priests acted as intermediaries, ensuring that offerings were made, hymns recited, and statues clothed. Festivals, however, brought gods out of the temples in processions, allowing the people to join in collective joy. These events reinforced identity and unity, making religion not only a matter of belief, but also of shared community. The Valley of the Kings exemplifies how beliefs in the afterlife shaped architecture. Hidden tombs carved into cliffs contained elaborate decorations depicting the soul's journey through the underworld. The Amduat and Book of Gates guided the deceased past dangers, demons, and trials toward union with the sun god. The artistry within these tombs is breathtaking: vibrant colors, intricate figures, and detailed hieroglyphs covering every surface. They remind us that Egyptians did not see death as an end, but as a transformation. Yet, even as Egyptians built for eternity, political realities pressed against them. The priesthood of Amun in Thebes became enormously wealthy, rivaling the crown itself. Temples owned vast lands, employed thousands, and accumulated treasure. Over time, this imbalance weakened royal authority, creating conditions where fragmentation was inevitable. The division between pharaohs in the north and priests in the south during the Third Intermediate Period symbolized a society no longer unified under a single vision. Foreign invasions accelerated this decline. The Assyrians struck with ruthless efficiency, capturing Thebes and leaving scars on Egyptian pride. The Persians followed, treating Egypt as one province in a vast empire. Despite revolts and brief restorations of independence, Egypt could no longer command the ancient power it once held. Its days as a dominant empire were over. The arrival of Alexander the Great injected a final burst of energy. Hellenistic Egypt under the Ptolemies produced cultural wonders: the Library of Alexandria, said to contain hundreds of thousands of scrolls, the museum, a center of learning and science, and the Pharaohs' lighthouse, a symbol of human ingenuity. Greek philosophy mingled with Egyptian spirituality, producing unique hybrids of thought. Egyptian gods were worshipped in new forms across the Mediterranean, especially Isis, who became a beloved figure in Rome. Cleopatra VII's reign captured the imagination of the world because it was the dramatic end of an era. She embodied both the ancient tradition and the new reality. As Isis reborn, she evoked millennia of Egyptian belief. As a diplomat entangled with Rome's greatest leaders, she navigated the harsh geopolitics of her age. Her death was not just a personal tragedy, but the symbolic end of Egypt's. With her, the last echoes of pharaonic sovereignty faded. And yet, Egypt did not vanish. Under Rome, it remained essential, feeding the empire with grain. Temples still functioned for centuries, hieroglyphs still carved, mummies still wrapped. Even when Christianity spread, it absorbed some of its imagery: the mother and child reminiscent of Isis and Horus, the cross echoing the Ankh, the ancient symbol of life. Later, under Islam, Egypt again adapted, becoming a vital center of learning, trade, and culture in the Arab world. What is striking is how Egypt continued to inspire long after its fall. For the Greeks, it was the land of wisdom, where philosophers sought ancient knowledge. For the Romans, it was exotic and eternal, a land of wonders. For medieval travelers, it was a land of mystery. For Renaissance thinkers, it was the keeper of lost secrets. And for modern archaeologists, it became the key to understanding humanity's past. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 reignited global fascination, with golden treasures dazzling the modern world and reminding us of Egypt's glory. The rise and fall of ancient Egypt, then, is not a closed chapter, but an ongoing story. Every excavation uncovers new details. Every translation of a papyrus reveals voices long silenced. Every visitor to the pyramids adds another layer to their meaning.
Egypt lives on not only in history books, but in imagination, art, film, and dreams. What can we learn from this long arc of time? Perhaps that all civilizations, no matter how powerful, are subject to cycles of growth and decline. Perhaps that human creativity can leave marks that outlast empires. Perhaps that the desire for immortality, so deeply embedded in Egypt's culture, is something we all share. When we look at the face of a painted mummy portrait with eyes gazing across 2,000 years, we are reminded of our connection to them. They lived, loved, feared, and hoped just as we do. Their world may have crumbled, but their stories continue to speak. The fascination with ancient Egypt lies not only in what it achieved, but in what it attempted. It was a civilization obsessed with eternity, with bending time itself to human will. Every monument, every ritual, every hieroglyph carved into stone was a declaration against oblivion. And though its kingdoms collapsed, its dynasties ended, and its gods were silenced, Egypt did in some way succeed. For more than 5,000 years, it has lived on in memory, in wonder, and in awe. To the ancient Egyptians, time itself was divided into two forms, Neha and Jet. Neha was cyclical time, the endless repetition of days, seasons, and years, the sun rising and setting, the Nile flooding and receding. Jet, by contrast, was eternal, unchanging, a timeless state beyond decay. Pharaohs strove to secure their place in Jet, building monuments and inscribing texts to ensure their memory would endure. In a way, they succeeded. Long after their power faded, their names, Khufu, Ramses, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Cleopatra, still resonate, carried forward by the very permanence they sought. The endurance of their memory reminds us that civilizations fall, but culture can transcend collapse. The pyramids no longer gleam with white limestone, but they still dominate the horizon. Temples lie in ruins, yet their columns rise proudly against the sky. Even fragments of papyrus, fragile as they are, speak across millennia, revealing daily life, poetry, wisdom, and humor. These remnants ensure that Egypt never truly died. But to truly appreciate Egypt, we must acknowledge its humanity. The grandeur of pyramids can overshadow the fact that they were built by human hands, by laborers who sweated under the sun, by artisans who carved intricate hieroglyphs, by families who supported them. In the painted tombs, we see banquets with laughter and music, hunting scenes filled with energy, children playing, farmers at work. These were not gods, but people, living lives that were both ordinary and extraordinary. We also see Egypt's contradictions. It was a land of wealth, yet famine struck when the Nile failed. It celebrated justice and balance, yet power could be ruthless and absolute. It built wonders for eternity, yet many were plundered within generations. It embraced foreign influence when useful, but resisted too much change when it threatened tradition. These tensions gave Egypt resilience, but also fragility. Why did Egypt fall? The answer lies not in a single event, but in a pattern familiar across history. Greatness requires resources, unity, and vision. As resources strained, as unity fractured, as vision faltered, decline set in. Foreign powers exploited weakness, and Egypt became a prize to be taken. Yet, unlike many civilizations that vanish almost without trace, Egypt left a legacy so monumental that even its ruins shape our idea of civilization itself. Its influence on later cultures is profound. Greek philosophers looked to Egypt as a source of wisdom. Roman emperors styled themselves in Egyptian imagery. Early Christians borrowed symbols and ideas. The Islamic scholars of medieval Egypt preserved and transmitted knowledge. Even today, architecture, art, and literature echo Egyptian forms. When we think of pyramids, sphinxes, or hieroglyphs, we are invoking not just Egypt, but the very concept of ancient civilization. And so, the rise and fall of ancient Egypt is not simply a historical narrative. It is a mirror of humanity. It shows us what we can achieve when we believe in something greater than ourselves, when we organize, innovate, and dream. It also warns us of the limits of power, the fragility of prosperity, and the inevitability of change.
Civilizations, like people, are mortal, but culture, like memory, can live forever. As we walk among the ruins today, we feel the presence of the past. The wind over the desert carries whispers of forgotten voices. The hieroglyphs carved deep into stone seem to reach out, asking to be remembered. And in remembering them, we grant the ancient Egyptians what they sought most: immortality. From the unification under Narmer to the glory of the New Kingdom, from the upheaval of invasions to the brilliance of Cleopatra's reign, Egypt's story is one of endurance and transformation. It reminds us that history is not static. It is alive, echoing in our art, our beliefs, and our imagination. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson of all, that even as civilizations fall, their stories rise again, carried forward by those who listen. By telling their stories, we keep them alive. By studying their ruins, we honor their achievements. By remembering their names, we grant them eternity. The rise and fall of ancient Egypt is a story that belongs not only to the past, but to all of us. It is a reminder of our capacity for greatness, our vulnerability to decline, and our enduring hope that something of us might outlast time. Thanks for watching The Other Side Stories. If you enjoyed this journey through history's hidden paths, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with fellow explorers. Your support helps us bring more forgotten stories to light. Until next time, keep wondering about the past that shapes our future.